What's going on, parents? My name is Dr. John Caruso. I am a pediatric prenatal family wellness chiropractor in Katy, Texas. And in this video, we're going to dive deep into speech delays. So, like so many other of the developmental delays and health challenges, specifically within our kids, when you see your child struggling with a speech delay, it's truly a heartbreaking and incredibly frustrating experience for parents, simply because speech delays and challenges, they don't just interfere with your child's communication, but also they frequently lead to many social and then emotional challenges as well, as they're frustrated and unable to communicate their needs and emotions to us as parents, teachers, those around us, as well as their peers. And so if your child has been diagnosed with a speech delay, or if you're concerned that they may have one, then this video is absolutely a must watch. And additionally, if your child is already diagnosed and receiving speech therapy services, but oftentimes a lot of these kids will still be struggling with speech or be plateaued with the results and the progress that they're making, please be sure to watch this video all the way through. And we're going to show you how so often traditional therapy, and while it's absolutely amazing and absolutely wonderful, and I love working with all of these speech therapists within the area, that it may not able to fully address the root cause and get them all the way there when we're speaking about the speech delay that your child may have. And so throughout this video, we're going to really break down the science and the neurology behind speech delays in our kids. And most importantly, get right into the missing action step and care option that you likely have been searching for all along. And so before we really get into the science, I want to share two incredible kids with you. The first is a kiddo named Grant. And so for Grant, mom had an incredibly stressful pregnancy, which ultimately ended up in an emergency C-section. Now, Grant was born with what's called infantile spasms. And infantile spasms are a type of seizure, typically within pediatrics. And so he had been on seizure medications basically since birth. And because his mom was so stinking cool and educated and informed, specifically because of her career path, she knew all of the things to be able to get him a diagnosis. And so at 18 months, he was given an ASD diagnosis and he was labeled as nonverbal or minimally speaking. And when mom and I sat down and I told her, I was like, look, there's a lot of cool stuff that can happen within chiropractic. And by no means am I saying that he's ever going to speak. But what you're going to start seeing as we start waking up the brain and turning on the nervous system and supporting the trajectory of brain development rather than suppressing it through medications is you're going to see some really cool stuff start to wake up. And so as we started getting into care with him, I think we were about 3 weeks, maybe 3 to 6 weeks into care. I started noticing some stuff with him whenever he was in the office. And I asked mom, I was like, hey, are you guys seeing some cool stuff at home? And she was like, you know what? I've been meaning to ask you about this because it's been some of the most interesting things that I've watched. And I don't really have a way to explain it with my clinical or career education and expertise, but he's playing more at home with his brother, and he's more interactive and he's more joyful and playful with us as his parents. And he's making more eye contact and he's pointing and he's gesturing and he's utilizing grunts, which are a form of expressive language. And if you know anything about kids on the spectrum, especially those that are minimally speaking or nonverbal, them making eye contact and utilizing the social aspect of it is one of the biggest factors of, hey, something is clicking and turning on within the brain. And one of the coolest things was, as I transitioned out of my wife's practice at the time and opened my own, about 3.5 months into care, he actually said his first word. And it was the coolest thing to hear. And I'm crying, mom's crying, my wife's crying, everybody's crying. And it's just this magical moment because he's defying the odds of what any of us really thought was was possible. And all that we've done is we've turned on the brain, allowed the brain and the nervous system to be supported along its trajectory of development so that these cool things like speech and cognition and motor control and all of the cool stuff that we love to watch within our kids take hold. The second kid that I really want to share is a 3-year-old that I've been seeing for a couple of months by the name of Jack. And so a little bit about Jack is that he had a life-threatening fall when he was about 8 months old. He fell off, went through the banisters from a second story, landed flat on the back of his head. And it actually fractured the occipital bone, or that big bone on the backside of our skull called the occiput. And so, Mom shares that honestly by the grace of God is that he's actually still here. And he's an absolute miracle baby because they did all the scans, the MRIs, the CTs, and all that they found was that he was concussed and not like a true brain injury. And so nobody could really explain why that he was still with them, and also why he didn't really suffer a brain injury with that big of a fall. And so before coming into our office, Jack's mom specifically noticed that he started to develop a pretty significant stutter. And it's not like a slight stutter, that, as our kids, especially little ones around the age of 3, are learning new words or trying to cognitively piece together words and sentences and things like that. But this was a full-on like mental block of verbalization, like could not get the words out sort of a thing. And, it really just kind of came out of nowhere. And then Mom shared this with me too, is that it was almost as if just one day he forgot how to get words out. And so Jack's mom, being as absolutely amazing as she is, she was like, I knew that we had to do something, and I knew it was related to the fall. And that she just felt it. She knew something was going on, but nobody could tell her exactly what it was. And so what was interesting was that was creating a lot of emotional stuff and frustration and anger within him because he was trying as hard as he possibly could to get all of this out, and then he was not able to. And so miraculously enough, about 2 to 3 weeks into care, Jack's mom was talking to me in the office. She's like, you know what? We're still kind of like unsure as to what the heck is going on, but like we're noticing that his stutter, his speech delay, his speech impediment is like getting fewer and farther between. And so she talked about this. She shared me with her husband that they were like, her husband didn't really want to say anything. She was like, I was waiting until you said something, but like I'm noticing it too. And so at about 4 weeks of care, which was about the time that we did our first re-exam with Jack, she was like, I actually haven't noticed his stutter in about 2 weeks. And not only are we not noticing the stutter, but like the amount of words that he's getting out and new words that we had no clue that he even knew is coming out. And right before Christmas, something that they shared with me was this little dude rocked a full-on Christmas recital in front of all of the school and all of the parents with no issues, no speech delays, no stutters, no blocks, and absolutely killed it. And so I share those because it's so amazing what our body can do and how quickly the brain can actually change. And what's fascinating is that with this kiddo specifically, Jack primarily, they didn't seek out any speech therapy. And it's not that they didn't want to, it's just they didn't know where to start and where to go. And what they learned was that the cranial work, the adjustments, the neurologically focused based care that we do here at Haven Family Chiropractic was a starting point or a landing pad for them to be able to see what was really necessary and what they needed to do moving forward. But I digress. Those are some of the coolest stories that I have, and there's many, many more of drooling and motor movement and speech delays and cognition and learning challenges and emotional regulation that all changes when we start addressing the brain and nervous system. But speaking about the brain and speaking about the nervous system, we're going to jump straight into the science when we're trying to understand speech delays. So I hope to give you guys more information and more education so that way you guys know exactly what are some of the missing links and the missing pieces to give you the action steps necessary to get your kiddos the absolute help that they need. And so first thing is we really need to start understanding what speech delays are. And so when we're talking about a speech delay, what we're really referring to is when a child's language and their communication skills develop on a much slower trajectory than what's typically expected. And this is typically indicating, especially from a chiropractic standpoint, that there is stress or interference within our brain and nervous system causing this specific delay. Because many children with speech delays may have individual words that can come out, but struggle to make them clear and to string them together and then form sentences. One of the cool instances that I love to share is from the Harvard brain discussion, where they actually talk about stress onto the brain and nervous system is one of the biggest things that not only alters the architecture or the structure of the developing brain, but also alters the functionality piece when we start talking about cognition and mental health and overall health in a really big way as they continue to develop. And so speech is one of the big things when we start talking about how a child progresses. But when we start looking at, the overall causes of speech delays, with most neurological and developmental delays in kiddos, conventional pediatricians will typically blame genetics and bad luck and not necessarily offer parents really any explanation at all as to why the delays are there within the first place. And most of the time, at least what I've heard from parents in the office, is that even if their child is delayed and their moms know deep within their mom gut that there's a problem, is that the pediatricians or the speech therapists or the school providers or whoever it is will absolutely say that they're within a normal range. And moms know that they're not. But when we're specifically talking about the causes of speech delays, speech delays are most commonly an issue with the physical formation as well as the execution of speech. So getting the actual words out, especially once there are other neurological disorders or hearing challenges that are totally ruled out. When we start talking about the causes, especially when we start looking at the brain and nervous system and the things that can impact the brain and nervous system, we start to look at birth interventions and trauma, especially if we're thinking about little Jack that we talked about earlier, and those being a big contributive factor to speech delays. So one of the absolute most overlooked contributing factors to speech delays that we see again and again and again within our practice is the role that birth interventions, such as forceps, C-sections, vacuums, manual traction out of the womb space, and induction medications can play, as well as how connected speech delays can be to things like chronic ear infections and torticollis and plagiocephaly, because the bones of the skull matter when we're talking about the structure of the brain and the functionality of how things grow. And so these specific things can all be traced back to birth intervention and trauma and to a thing that's called subluxation, or stress stuck on our nervous system. So when we start talking about subluxation and we talk about speech delays or that stress stuck on, and since we know that in the majority of cases a child's speech delay is caused by physical challenges within our nerves, within our nervous system, within the brain, within our muscles that then coordinate and execute speech, it's essential that parents learn and know about a neuromuscular condition called subluxation. And so when we're talking about subluxation, we're really talking about the neurological dysfunction that creates irritation and interference or disrupted communication specifically between our brain and the body. And in this case, it's most specifically connected to the nerves and the muscles that coordinate and control speech, the perception, the formation, and then execution of expressive language. And so whenever we start looking at cesarean delivery specifically, when you see this specific image, what you're really looking at is the altered tone and the tension that's being placed on the most delicate and the most neurologically unprotected area within the entire brain, body, nervous system, whole body concept. And so what really gets the most impacted here is what we're seeing within the upper neck, primarily the first cervical vertebra and the second cervical vertebra. And so why this is really important is that the vagus nerve, which is a big part of our parasympathetic side, plays a really big role with socialization, and it plays a really big role with emotional regulation, is that when this area is impacted, or there's subluxation, or there's physical injury to the area, it wreaks havoc on our brain and nervous system, and wreaks havoc on development, especially when we start talking about speech. And so this is why in nearly 90% of the kids that we take on within our office, there's some degree of big physical stress and big physical trauma from labor and delivery. Not to mention in the case of Jack, with the falls, the trips, the slips, and all of that happens as a young boy within that, is that it adds more injury to the insult that's already been created within our brain and nervous system. And so when we really start to culminate or be able to take in all of that, is that when we start piecing all of those puzzles together of like, hey, these are the things that have happened. There's been birth trauma and intervention and falls and slips and trips and issues, and the delays are there, the struggles are there. We take that all into account. We measure what's going on within the nervous system, and then we start to understand what role is it that pediatric chiropractic care can play whenever we're supporting the brain and nervous system and supporting these kids when we talk about speech development. And so the most unique thing about our neurologically focused, approach at Haven Family Chiropractic is that we are absolutely not seeking to treat or cure speech delays. I share this with all of my parents. It's like, I can't get a kid to talk. I can't even cure a ham. And so when we have to understand is that instead of treating or fixing or curing, which is typically the focus that we have, our parents have the focus of we need to fix this thing, but they're not broken. We have to remember that. Our kids are not broken, so there's nothing to fix. The things just have to be supported rather than suppressed, I should say. But, instead of that treating or fixing or curing sort of mentality that's sometimes taken, our entire focus is to specifically work with parents and other providers. Like I said before, speech therapists are my absolute favorite providers to work with because they understand the depth that it takes for some of these kids to really start talking and talking well. But, we work alongside parents and we work alongside other providers to make sure that we are addressing the root cause, specifically the neuromuscular dysfunction or subluxation, the irritation and the interference within our nervous system, and then creating a very personalized, customized, tailored care plan for each and every single child, rather than recommending and then doing the same thing for every single kid simply based upon their delay or diagnosis. Because it's one thing for us to chase a deficit, and it's another thing for us to actually support the brain along its typical trajectory of development. So in closing, I love to share as much information as I can. And while seeing your child fall behind on speech and other developmental milestones, especially when we talk about our littles, like rolling and crawling and walking and running and jumping and all the cool stuff that they're supposed to do, when we see them fall behind, it can really be disheartening to us as parents, and it can be really, really frustrating, especially when you're not being listened to or affirmed from the people that you go to with the most faith and the most trust. And so getting to the absolute root cause with a neurologically focused pediatric chiropractor and seeing your child get back on track can be the absolute most rewarding and the absolute most exciting thing ever. Thinking about Jack, whenever he rocked that Christmas recital and had his own song and did his all things, and the video for that was absolutely amazing. But if you're looking to get, and this is something that I share with every single parent, is like, if you're looking to get the absolute most out of your speech therapy for a speech delayed child, or even PT or OT, and then you really want to just make sure that your child gets back on track, visit the link in our bio and find all of the full educational articles that we have on our website, specifically about speech delays in our kids. Or what you can do is just send us a DM to schedule the consultation, the exam with us at Haven Family Chiropractic. As always, send us a DM, shoot us a comment, reach out to our office, because we are always here and always willing to help you.